chamber was electric, humming with the low murmur of reporters, aides, and restless spectators. Cameras hovered like hawks, lenses trained on the woman at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett. She stood poised, her voice cutting through the air with the rhythm of conviction, words measured yet fierce. For a moment, it felt as though the room was bending to her command, and then came the interruption. Order. Judge Beryl Howell's voice cracked like a whip, slicing across the room with the kind of practiced authority that had silenced countless others before. Her eyes narrowed, chin tilted in the familiar posture of superiority. "You are out of line, Congresswoman. Sit down." The room froze. Even the air seemed to hesitate, waiting for what would happen next. Howell's tone carried not just reprimand, but a warning, a signal that this was her arena, her rules, and her moment to put a rising star in her place. Jasmine blinked once, steady. The gavel's echo still rang in the chamber, but she did not flinch. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the delicate tension of a woman under fire. A woman many expected to retreat under the weight of judicial scorn, because that's how the story usually went, wasn't it? The authority figure speaks, the challenger bows, and the hierarchy is restored. Millions watching at home felt the pull of expectation. Surely this would be no different. Surely Howell's glare would be enough to smother Crockett's momentum. But in that silence, something else crackled beneath the surface. Crockett's composure wasn't fragility. It was steel. Her pause wasn't submission. It was calculation. The hook gripped tighter. The world thought Jasmine Crockett had been silenced. What came next would flip the script forever. Howell leaned back slightly, lips pressed in the faintest smirk of triumph, as if the battle was already won. Yet anyone who truly knew Jasmine Crockett, her training, her battles, in reality, it had just witnessed a spark. But Judge Howell had no idea. The woman she tried to humiliate was about to teach her a legal lesson for the ages. For years, Judge Beryl Howell had been a figure cloaked in authority, the kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Her gavel had shaped headlines, her rulings carried the weight of permanence. To many, she was untouchable, a guardian of procedure whose stern gaze could reduce confidence to dust. Her name was synonymous with command. Her voice the final word. That was the reputation she carried into this chamber. And it was the very reputation she leaned on when she snapped at Jasmine Crockett, trying to drag the Congresswoman into silence with nothing more than tone and title. Most would have folded. Most would have taken the verbal strike, shrunk back into submission, and let the moment pass, praying not to become the latest casualty of Howell's iron stare. But Jasmine Crockett is not most. The tension in that room wasn't just about two women exchanging sharp words. It was bigger, deeper. This was the spectacle of establishment power colliding with a voice that refused to bow. On one side stood a judge, robed in tradition, projecting the aura of law itself. On the other stood an elected representative, forged in the fire of public trust, speaking not just for herself, but for every voter, every immigrant family, every underdog who had ever looked at authority and wondered if they belonged. That clash mattered. Because it wasn't only Crockett's dignity at stake, it was the dignity of the people who sent her to that chamber. It was symbolic, an attempt to enforce silence on a voice that carried the stories of those long silenced before. The room felt it. The audience at home felt it. This was more than parliamentary theatrics or legal formality. It was a collision between hierarchy and hope, between an establishment that had always assumed obedience and a woman who refused to give it. Every pause, every glare, every measured breath fed the suspense. Reporters shifted in their seats, sensing history. Viewers leaned closer to their screens, sensing confrontation. The gavel was more than wood and echo. It was a weapon, and Howell had just tried to use it. But Crockett's silence after that strike was not defeat. It was the inhale before a storm. The anticipation pressed against the walls of the chamber, and the world was about to find out what happens when brilliance refuses to bow. What happens in the next 5 minutes will ripple far beyond this courtroom, Judge. Beryl Howell did not arrive at this moment by accident. Her career was forged in the corridors of power, layered with decades of rulings, speeches, and a cultivated image of stern impartiality. To the casual observer, she was the embodiment of judicial authority, polished, precise, untouchable. But peel back the veneer, and another portrait begins to emerge, one marked not only by discipline, but by a pattern of dismissiveness and quiet arrogance that her critics knew all too well. She was known for her sharp tongue in the courtroom. Attorneys who stumbled even slightly often found themselves on the receiving end of biting remarks. Her defenders called it efficiency. Her detractors called it cruelty. She cultivated a reputation as a woman who tolerated no nonsense, who wielded sarcasm as easily as the gavel itself. It won her admiration from some corners, but also fear, the kind that kept people silent. Her rulings often carried the weight of finality, yet they were not without controversy. Civil liberties groups had long whispered about her tendency to side with authority over challengers. When activists sought relief, they rarely found sympathy in Howell's chambers. She speaks of fairness, one critic once remarked, yet her tone reveals disdain. The contradictions piled high. She could lecture about equality from the bench, but in the same breath, dismiss a public defender's plea with a smirk. She could declare the importance of protecting speech, yet raise her voice to silence the inconvenient words of those who challenged her framing. To many, she represented the paradox of power, a figure draped in the language of justice. It was the unspoken law beneath the law that those who wore the robe commanded the room, and those who did not were expected to bend. She embodied the old guard, the school of thought that authority was not earned through service, but inherited through tradition and stature.
Ow.
When she raised her voice at Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't just about procedure. It was about asserting dominance, about reminding a younger, bolder woman where she supposedly stood. But there was something Howell had not counted on. This was not a routine sparring partner, not another nervous attorney hoping to scrape by. Without humiliation, Jasmine Crockett was not merely a congresswoman. Crockett's eyes, as fear, mistaking her pause for submission. But what simmered beneath that calm exterior was calculation, the quiet, razor-sharp readiness of someone who had spent years preparing for battles, exactly like this one. The judge had built her career on the assumption that authority was unassailable, that her gavel was a weapon that could silence dissent with a crack and a glare. But this time, she was facing someone who not only understood the weight of the law, she understood how to wield it back, and that was Howell's blind spot. She had faced countless challengers before, men and women who crumbled under the pressure, who mistook her tone for invincibility. But she had never faced Jasmine Crockett. But what Howell didn't anticipate was Crockett's hidden weapon, a razor-sharp legal mind, long before the cameras turned toward her, before the headlines cast her as the woman who refused to be silenced. Jasmine Crockett's life was already a study in resilience. She was not born into privilege, nor did she inherit power from some long political dynasty. Her story began far from marble courtrooms and echoing chambers, in the neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce and justice often felt like a word reserved for others. From an early age, Crockett understood the gap between what America promised and what many people lived. She watched friends and neighbors brushed aside by systems that were supposed to protect them. She saw how power seemed to speak one language, while ordinary people spoke another, a language of survival. That awareness didn't break her spirit, it sharpened it. Law school wasn't a path lined with red carpets for Jasmine, it was a battlefield. She carried more than her own ambition into every lecture hall. She carried the weight of proving that young black women belonged in spaces many had long reserved for others. Doubt shadowed her steps, not her own, but the doubt of professors, colleagues, and gatekeepers who underestimated her. Each time they questioned her place, she answered with preparation, with precision, with the unrelenting drive to show. That brilliance doesn't bow to bias. When she graduated and stepped into her role as an attorney, Crockett didn't chase prestige. She chased purpose. She became a defender of the underdogs, the people who couldn't afford the glossy firms or the polished reputations. Her clients were the ones the system often forgot, the wrongly accused, the overlooked, the one society, wrote off before their trials even began. Every time she stood beside them, she carried their stories like armor. Every courtroom she walked into, she carried the weight of those who never had a voice. She argued with fire, not for headlines, but for humanity. She wasn't afraid of losing cases, she was afraid of losing faith in justice itself. Faith, however fragile, fueled her. Her activism grew naturally from her work. The courtroom was one battleground, but Crockett knew the struggle extended beyond the bench. She stood with protesters, spoke out against injustices, and refused to let her profession confine her to quiet halls when the streets demanded her presence. Her activism wasn't an accessory to her career. It was the soul of it. It was that reputation, attorney, activist, fighter that carried her into Congress. For many, the leap from courtroom to Capitol Hill would have been daunting. For Jasmine, it was simply the next battlefield. Oath wasn't to climb higher, but to dig deeper. To take the fight she waged for individuals and elevate it to a fight for communities, for states, for a nation still struggling to reconcile its ideals with its reality. She didn't walk into Congress with the polish of the establishment. She walked in with the scars of struggle and the clarity that comes only from living on the front lines of inequity. That authenticity, raw, unfiltered, unapologetic, became her strength. So when she faced Judge Howell, she wasn't simply a congresswoman caught in a clash of personalities. She was a woman forged in years of being underestimated, of being told she was out of place, of standing against towering institutions that demanded her silence. She had lived this fight too many times to misread it now. Her background as a lawyer wasn't just a career line on a resume. It was training for this exact showdown. Every cross-examination, every moment where a judge rolled their eyes at her arguments. Every time a system tried to dismiss her, it had prepared her for this confrontation. The gavel slammed, but this time, Jasmine wasn't the one on trial. The gavel cracked against wood again, a thunderclap meant to end the moment. Judge Beryl Howell leaned forward, eyes narrowed into thin slits of authority. "Congresswoman Crockett," she snapped, her voice echoing with the kind of finality that had silenced so many before. "You are out of order." Gasps fluttered across the chamber. Pens scribbled faster, reporters trading glances, sensing the scene blooming into something bigger than procedure. Howell's tone dripped with certainty, the kind that assumed Crockett would lower her head, yield, and move on. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She kept her hands folded neatly on the table before her, posture straight, voice steady. "With respect, Judge," she said, her words sharp as glass, "I am entirely within my rights to continue." The words carried no tremor. Calm, measured, deliberate. That calmness made them sting even more. Howell's jaw tightened. "You will not lecture this court. I will not tolerate insubordination." Her voice rose, cutting into the air like a blade. She was asserting dominance, relying on the same tactics that had bent countless challengers to her will. But Crockett leaned in slightly, her voice low enough to force listeners closer, high enough to command attention. "This isn't insubordination," she replied. "It's accountability. The people I represent did not send me here to be silent." The chamber stirred, whispers curling between seats, heads turning to one another in disbelief. Was this really happening? A congresswoman defying the stern command of a federal judge? Howell's cheeks flushed, her smirk faltering into something harsher, sharper. "You will address this court with proper respect," she demanded. And yet, Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't match fury with fury. That was Howell's battlefield. Crockett's weapon was composure. "Respect," she said, her eyes locked on the judge, "is not silence. Respect is earned, and it is mutual." Sentence struck like a dart. A ripple moved through the chamber. Porters shifted forward in their chairs. Aides' eyes widened. The energy shifted subtly, but undeniably. For the first time, Howell looked less like the unshakable pillar of authority and more like someone straining to hold control. The judge tapped her gavel again, harder this time. "That is enough," she snapped. But the sharpness sounded more like desperation than command. Crockett's pause was intentional. the kind of silence that screams louder than words. She let the echo of the gavel fade before she spoke again, voice steady, unbroken. The law was written to protect people, not to intimidate them, and I intend to stand by it. The murmurs grew louder now, reporters scribbling so furiously their pens threatened to tear the page. The divide between villain and hero crystallized in that moment, Howell towering and furious, clinging to authority, Crockett calm and grounded, embodying the strength of someone who knew she stood on truth. And then came the turning point, a single sentence that froze the room. The silence after Howell's last gavel strike hung heavy, stretching across the chamber like a taut wire, ready to snap. All eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. The judge's expression radiated command, daring her to push further, but Crockett's face revealed no fear, only focus. Her moment had arrived. She leaned forward, her tone precise, her cadence deliberate. "Your Honor," she began with, "the deepest respect for this institution, I must remind you of a principle older and stronger than any gavel. The Constitution of the United States does not grant silence to the powerful. It guarantees voice to the people." A murmur swept through the chamber. Crockett's words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They carried the gravity of history itself. Howell stiffened. "This is not a campaign speech, Congresswoman. Stick to the matter before us." Crockett didn't break eye contact. "The matter before us, Judge, is fairness. Precedent is clear. Brandenburg v. Ohio reaffirmed that even speech deemed inconvenient cannot be silenced. And in Bond v. United States, the court recognized the individual's right to challenge overreach." She paused, letting the names of the cases hang in the air like thunder. "I am not beyond accountability, but neither is this bench." Gasps rippled through the chamber. A reporter's pen slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. Howell blinked, caught between indignation and the creeping awareness that she was no longer dictating the rhythm of the exchange. "Congresswoman, you will control yourself," Howell tried to cut in. But Crockett continued, calm, unwavering, the rising tide that no gavel could hold back. "Control is not the same as justice. Justice demands courage. And if history teaches us anything, it is that authority without humility always collapses under its own weight." The chamber erupted in whispers. Some spectators covered there, mouths stunned at the audacity. Others smiled, nodding, their eyes bright with recognition. This was more than a confrontation. It was a transformation. Howell slammed the gavel again. "Enough." Her voice cracked louder than before. But the crack carried something unexpected strain. Crockett let the echo fade before answering, her timing impeccable. "You can strike the desk as many times as you want, Judge Howell, but you cannot strike down the truth." The words landed like a hammer blow of their own. For the first time, Howell faltered. Her lips parted, as if a retort were forming, but no words came. The silence that followed was deafening, and Crockett filled it with brilliance. Article 1 of the Constitution entrusts representatives with the duty to speak for their districts. I was not sent here to whisper, I was sent here to fight for those whose voices rarely reach rooms like this one. If I am out of line, it is because the line itself was drawn to keep them out. The gallery stirred, a swell of approval rising. A smattering of applause broke out before being hushed. But the sound lingered, undeniable proof that momentum had shifted. Howell tried again, her words clipped. "This chamber will not descend into disorder." Crockett tilted her head slightly, voice calm but cutting. "Disorder isn't when someone dares to speak. Disorder is when institutions abuse power to silence them." It was surgical, each phrase delivered with the precision of a scalpel. She wasn't shouting, she was dismantling. Howell's authority, once absolute, was crumbling piece by piece. Exposed as fragile beneath the weight of Crockett's composure, the judge's interruptions grew fewer. Her once commanding tone now, tinged with frustration, every attempt to reassert dominance only underscored the fact that she had lost it. The room could feel it. The audience knew it. Crockett paused, drawing in a breath that seemed to steady the entire chamber. She let her gaze sweep across the rows of reporters, aides, and staffers before returning to Howell. Her voice softened, but in that softness was steel. My entire career has been defined by people telling me when to stop. Professors, partners, prosecutors, politicians, they all thought their titles gave them the right to silence me. But I stand here today because I didn't stop then, and I won't stop now, because justice doesn't bow to intimidation. The words ignited the chamber. Applause broke out louder this time, harder to suppress, a human wave that even Howell's gavel couldn't drown out. For the first time, Howell's mask slipped. The woman who had long been untouchable, unflappable, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her confidence visibly cracking. She raised the gavel once more, but the sound was hollow, drowned beneath the pulse of the moment. And Crockett sealed it with the line that would echo long after the room emptied. The law was written not for the comfort of the powerful, but for the protection of the people. And that is why I will not be silent. The chamber erupted. Some clapped. Some gasped. Others simply sat stunned, knowing they had just witnessed a turning point, the instant when authority surrendered to authenticity. By the end, it wasn't Crockett fighting for her dignity, it was Howell scrambling too. Preserve her own. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the outside world erupted. Within minutes, phones in the chamber lit up as news alerts poured in. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's fiery exchange with Judge Beryl Howell exploded across social media.
Oh, what had begun?
As a tense courtroom clash instantly transformed into a cultural lightning storm. On Twitter, X hashtags rocketed into the trending column. Hashtag Crockett vs. Howell. Hashtag voice not silenced. And simply hashtag Jasmine. Memes flooded the platform, side-by-side images of Howell slamming her gavel and Crockett calmly dismantling her arguments captioned, "Authority versus Truth." Another viral post showed Crockett's final words plastered over an American flag background. The law was written not for the comfort of the powerful, but for the protection of the people. Instagram Reels and TikTok edits amplified the moment further. Music swelled under Crockett's speech, dramatic cuts highlighting Howell's faltering reactions. Each version racked up millions of views, comment sections filled with fire emojis, and declarations of solidarity. That's how you handle power, queen energy. This is what courage looks like. The cable news networks scrambled to catch up. By primetime, chirons blared across the screen. Crockett School's Judge Howell. Analysts replayed the clip on loop, some marveling at Crockett's mastery of constitutional precedent, others critiquing Howell's missteps. Even outlets usually hostile to Crockett couldn't deny it. Congresswoman had commanded the stage and left Howell visibly shaken. Supporters cheered loudly. Political allies framed her as a rising star, a fighter unafraid to stare down. Establishment arrogance. Grassroots organizations posted messages of gratitude, emphasizing how her words resonated with communities long silenced or ignored. One activist tweeted, "She didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for all of us who've been told to stay in line." Critics tried to spin the narrative. Howell's defenders accused Crockett of grandstanding, of disrespecting the bench. Editorials warned of erosion of decorum. But the effort fell flat. Every attempt to frame Crockett as reckless only underscored the reality that her poise and precision had outclassed Howell in real time. The public wasn't buying the spin. Viewers at home typed the same words again and again. "That's my Congresswoman." For many, this wasn't about legal minutia. It was about watching someone refuse to be bullied by a symbol of entrenched power. Crockett hadn't just defended herself. She had embodied the resistance so many ordinary citizens longed to see. In the days that followed, her exchange with Howell became more than a trending moment. It became a cultural touchstone. Late-night hosts replayed the clip with applause. Opinion columns framed it as a generational clash. Howell, the emblem of the old guard, versus Crockett. It's the unapologetic voice of the new. But beneath the memes, the sound bites, and the headlines, something deeper stirred. Moment carried a weight that no hashtag could contain. It wasn't just Crockett's legal brilliance on display. was the reminder that truth spoken with courage could still pierce the armor of authority, and that realization rippled beyond politics. People saw their own struggles in hers: the worker dismissed by a boss, the student silenced in class, the citizen ignored by leaders. Crockett's showdown crystallized a universal lesson that dignity, spoken with conviction, could topple even the tallest pedestal of power. The world had witnessed a viral victory. But beyond the storm of likes and retweets was something far more enduring, a lesson that echoed long after the screens went dark. Jasmine. Crockett stood in that chamber, knowing the story wasn't hers alone. Yes, Judge Howell had tried to diminish her. Yes, the gavel had slammed with condescension. But Crockett understood something deeper. The exchange wasn't just about one woman holding her ground. It was about respect, dignity, and truth in the face of arrogance. She reframed the moment with a clarity that cut through all the noise. Howell's sharp tone, her interruptions, her barely disguised disdain, these weren't signs of strength. They were the trembling reflexes of power, desperate to maintain control. Arrogance cloaked in procedure. Authority hollowed out by fear. Crockett's response revealed the opposite. Calm, deliberate, unshaken, she embodied dignity. Where Howell barked commands, Crockett invoked principles. Where Howell leaned on the weight of her gavel, Crockett leaned on the power of law, of precedent, of constitutional promise. The clash was never really about who could shout louder. It was about who could stand taller. In that way, the scene became universal. It wasn't just a judge versus a congresswoman. It was the old guard of elitism trying to silence the rising voice of representation. It was the establishment's disdain clashing with the lived truth of a woman who had fought too hard to ever bow. Howell represented a system that confused authority with respect. Crockett reminded everyone that true respect is earned by defending the people, not by lording over them. And she distilled it into one unforgettable truth. The law is not a weapon for the powerful. It is a shield for the people. Those words reverberated like a creed. Every immigrant who had been told they didn't belong, every worker dismissed by the smugness of a boss, every young activist talked down to by those who claimed to know. Better, they heard their own defiance in her voice. Crockett wasn't just speaking to a judge, she was speaking to history. To anyone who had ever been diminished and dared to rise anyway, she transformed an insult into an anthem. She proved that every attempt to silence can backfire. Every effort to humiliate can reveal the true fragility of power. Howell's arrogance had tried to corner her. Instead, it spotlighted her strength, and from that strength came the lesson. Every insult can be flipped into proof of resilience. If you stand firm in who you are, the crescendo of her message reached far beyond politics. It became personal for millions. Parents told their children about Crockett's courage. Teachers replayed her words in classrooms as lessons in integrity. Community leaders quoted her as they rallied people to stand tall in their own fights. Because in the end, Crockett didn't just defend herself. She reframed the entire meaning of dignity. She showed that silence is not the price of respect. Truth is. And when truth is spoken with conviction, it doesn't just level the playing field. It tilts it toward justice. That is why her victory resonated so deeply. It wasn't about a courtroom or a chamber. It was about the universal promise that when arrogance confronts dignity, dignity wins, not by force, not by volume, but by unwavering clarity. And so, what began as a clash between a judge and a congresswoman transformed into a lasting parable. Authority can command, but only truth can inspire. The gavel may have struck, but the echo that remained belonged to Jasmine Crockett, and to every person who refuses to be silenced. Judge Beryl Howell thought she could punish Jasmine Crockett. She thought the gavel, the glare, the scolding tone would be enough to break her down, to remind her of who supposedly held the power. But instead, the opposite happened. The moment that was meant to humiliate Crockett became the moment that defined her. Because what unfolded was more than just a confrontation. It was a reversal. Authority tried to flex. Dignity answered. And the balance of power shifted before everyone's eyes. Howell's authority shrank in real time, while Crockett's presence expanded, filling the chamber and spilling far beyond it. And that's why this story matters. In that chamber, brilliance beat arrogance, calm dismantled condescension, truth outshined theatrics, and the world took note. The cameras didn't just capture a clash. They captured a lesson, one that will echo for years. This isn't just about politics. It's about every person who has ever been underestimated, every voice told to sit down, every identity dismissed by the old guard. Crockett's stand is proof that the people who try to silence us often end up amplifying us. So here's the choice. Let this moment be another headline, or let it be a rallying cry. Share it. Talk about it. Make sure the story of Jasmine Crockett standing tall against arrogance becomes part of the story we tell about who we are. Because if you believe truth will always outshine arrogance, then this is your story too. Share this story. Subscribe and join a movement that refuses to be silenced. The gavel may fall, but the echo belongs to us.